I am Pam Keith. I am running to represent you in Washington. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, my backstory, my background, and then we're going to just kind of open the floor for your questions. I mean, that's really what this is all about. It's about getting to know what you want me to know and what how I can be of service as your representative, how I think about the issues. That is so important because it's about how you think, not just what you think. What you think can change, and it may be that you never get to address what you think. But how you think is really as important, where your values are, or how you come to problem solving and so on. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am the daughter of a U.S. diplomat. So I was actually born overseas. My father was a naval officer before I was born, but then he joined the Foreign Service. So I was born in Turkey. I lived in Morocco. Then I lived in Syria, all before I was 7. And that was really an interesting experience as a child. So the first thing that did for me was obviously it gave me a bigger worldview. And I was constantly required to learn new languages and meet new kids and find a way to make new friends. But the other thing was that I didn't really know America all that well, other than what my parents told me. And my parents told me what you tell a 6 years old. Like they're, America's opportunity, freedom, justice, land of milk and honey. You get to have McDonald's and play in the pool. And so for me, America was like Disneyland. It was like the ultimate. And when I did come home periodically to visit my grandma, what I learned was that it wasn't exactly what my parents said. It was an awful lot of time in church, which was not what I envisioned. But we did have great times in the summer eating barbecue and playing outside. And you begin to get a deeper sense of what America is by understanding what it's not, having something to compare it to. Over the years that I grew up, I got a more deeper, profound understanding of the values that we cherish. I understood the freedom of the press and free speech so much more when I actually lived in Brazil with my dad, and we were living under a military dictatorship, where the journalists would disappear in the middle of the night. People were afraid of being overheard criticizing the government. And I just thought they were crazy. Like, what's the big deal? So what if you don't like so-and-so? And they're like, shh, you don't talk about that. I began to understand what it felt like to live under that kind of oppression because I was exposed to it. So I knew I wasn't stuck with it. I knew we were coming back home and I could get back to the United States. But I also got to see countries with extreme poverty. My father for a while was stationed in Cairo. If you've ever been to Cairo, it's just that massive, bustling city where like 80% of the people are in like poverty like you would not believe. And then this other percentage is in opulence. And I remember being so grateful that I lived in a country that had this huge, abundant middle class. That there were some who were going to do very well, and clearly there were some who were going to do very poorly. But that the overwhelming majority of people were going to get a chance. I want to give you an anecdote about how that impacted me personally. I must have been about 17 years old at that time. And my father was taking me to a reception at a home of an Egyptian filmmaker, very, very wealthy man. And it was in a compound, and if you've ever traveled a lot of these overseas, you see compounds with this concertina wire at the top, and they have a gate and so on. And as we were driving up to the gate, the car had to stop to get through the gate, and all these little street urchins came up to the car, these little kids. And, the youngest was probably 3 or 4. The oldest was probably 10, somewhere in there. And they came knocking on our door looking for baksheesh, looking for money. And I'm looking at them, and they were emaciated, they were clearly malnourished, they were poorly dressed, they were really, really poor. And I'm sitting here going, Dad, we gotta give these kids something. And my father was like, before we could even get through the gate, the guards pushed the kids away, in a very hostile, very aggressive, very mean way, and pushed the kids away. We drove into the compound. We get in the compound, walk in, this big old foyer, 5 or 6 tables, groaning with food. Like every kind of food you can possibly imagine. And I literally could not eat a morsel because I was watching this contrast. And the people that were in this room literally stepped over starving children to get to this room full of food. And they felt no compunction about it. And I was deeply disturbed. I was like, and I knew half of the food would get thrown away. There was so much of it. It was there to impress the attendants. And I was like, wow. It was in that moment that I began to appreciate valuing everybody having enough. That's a core component of our country, that everybody gets a little bit enough. We have to accept abject starvation and as huge numbers of people in abject poverty. That's not who we are. And you know what? We should be proud of that. That's something to celebrate. So over time, as I was traveling, as I visited different cultures, I learned to appreciate those cultures very much. I loved Brazil. I got a lot of traveling to Egypt. I got a lot from Europe and all these other places. But all it did also was strengthen for me the values that we have right here. And that is why I'm so called to what I do. I've lived all over this country. I've lived all over this world. I'm so grateful that we're here right now. This is a great state. It is paradise, whether it feels like it right now or not. And it is absolutely the values that we share that are worth fighting and defending. I didn't step into politics because of Donald Trump. I stepped into politics before Donald Trump because I could see too many people that used to be okay are no longer okay. They're no longer okay because Social Security is just not going as far as it did. Everything else is getting more expensive, but the Social Security benefit is not increasing. I watched medication just start to skyrocket in costs, and people making the impossible Hobbesian choice between paying their rent and paying for their medications, and being told this is the only option we have. And I know that that's not true. I got into politics because I watched, the environment that we, the country, the environment that we love, our beaches, our rivers, our lakes, our mountains get plundered and destroyed because of short-term profit decisions. And I know we can do better than that. We are not being fiscally responsible when we make a decision that makes millionaires today and causes us billions to clean up tomorrow. That's not logical. That's just, it's greed. And so I was called to step up and speak and advocate on behalf of the people, because that's what I had done for my professional career. My first job out of law school, I went to law school because, well, I like to argue. I know you're going to find this shocking. And I figured it was something I could get paid to do. Get paid to argue. How cool is that? But my first job out of law school was serving as a U.S. naval officer. I felt I wanted to give back to the country that I loved. I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. I felt it was a great honor to put on the uniform and serve my country. Not only that, but I thought I would get this tremendous responsibility, and I did. And I got to learn how to be a courtroom lawyer. Anybody seen that movie, A Few Good Men?
Yeah. Oh, God.
That was me. It was awesome. And I did learn how to be forceful and aggressive and to make a case, not just make a point, but make a case, which is qualitatively different. So I learned all of that. And after my Navy time, I went to represent large corporations. I had a bunch of law school loans to pay off. So I had to go get a job that paid well, and I got out there and I learned how to be a labor and employment attorney. My job was negotiating and arbitrating cases. So I know how to find common ground, I know how to find win-win solutions, but I also know how to win if I have to. That's important, especially for Democrats. So, having had that experience, 20 years of doing that, I felt compelled to step up and use that skill and use that passion and use that background and that exposure and that knowledge on behalf of the people who could never afford to pay a billable hour. The only way that people get an advocate is with their vote. It's the greatest gift our ancestors, our forefathers gave to us. The ability to control the direction of our country with our own vote. You lose that, you lose the very core nature of our country. And so that's what compelled me to get in the fight. I got in last cycle. People said I got in way over my head. I ran for U.S. Senate. I went big. I'm telling you, I went big. Did I know exactly what I was getting into? Nope. But am I glad that I went big anyway? Yes. I am the first African-American woman ever to run for U.S. Senate in our state. You'd think that that was not true, right? I mean, it is 2018. You'd think that somebody else tried it before, but it never happened. And what I found in politics was that certainly for people who don't come from wealth in general, but certainly women and women of color particularly, we are encouraged to run for city council or a county commission or a school board, and at some places they'll let you run for state house, maybe state senate. But pretty soon they start to tell you that you're swimming outside of your lane if you want to go any bigger than that. There are a whole lot of qualified African American women in positions of power in our state who wanted to run for Congress or Senate or governor and were discouraged from doing so. And so I just decided that I was going to run for what I wanted, because I figure those people who are uncomfortable with the notion of me as a U.S. Senator have two choices, right? They can either not vote for me, or they can get used to me. But what they don't get to do is push me out of the lane. They don't get to do that. I'm going to stay in the lane. I'm going to make my case. And I'm going to make it to the best of my ability. And you can agree, you can disagree, but I'm going to stay where I'm at. And that's what I did. And with that tenacity, I ended up with 174,000 votes in last cycle, with basically no money. 174,000 people believed that I was the best choice for U.S. Senate. And I am proud of that. Even though that wasn't enough to win, that was enough to make a splash. And it certainly was enough to get me started in this race. So here I am now, because I don't give up, I don't quit, and I don't back down. And I am running for Congress to represent you. I have behind me 20 years of legal experience, experience in the military, experience in foreign policy. I have experience in labor and employment work and our laws and how they function. I speak 3 languages. Well, no, I speak 4 in addition to English. I speak French, Spanish, Portuguese, and of course, I'm fluent in Republican. And I have the tenacity, the strength, the creativity, and the passion to energize the vote that we need to win. We know what does not work in terms of winning this district. What does not work is running centrist Democrats who appease everybody but excite no one, right? Because it's the marginal voter, the disenfranchised voter, the uninterested voter, the occasional voter that we have to convince to show up. And so it is my belief that there are 3 kinds of voters. There are the engagers, the truthers, and the disengagers. And let me explain what I mean by that. An engager is a person who is politically curious, engages information. If they get a good piece of information, they'll engage with it. If they get a bad one, they'll engage with it. It may shape their opinion. They are movable voters, but they engage information. Some a little too much information. That's an engager. A truther is a person who is hard parked on what they believe to be true and could care less if it's accurate or not. Could care less if it hurts them or not. They believe what they believe, and they don't engage with anything that will move them off of that position. We got a lot of people in our district like that, I'm afraid. But the non-engagers are the people, and you may know some of these people, who, when you try to talk to them about politics, they'll say, oh, I hate politics. I so don't want to talk about politics. All of them are liars. I don't know who's telling the truth. Everything is just so corrupt. I just can't engage, like whatever. I don't vote. I don't care. And like I can't be bothered. Those very same people will be able to tell you chapter and verse on their motorcycle or their dog or their granddaughter's cheerleading practice. When they find a topic that they're interested in, they will go all in. They will be absolute experts. They don't worry about their judgment when it comes to the things that they like. But when it comes to politics, they just feel like there's no way they can tell one from the other, and they will just defer to the judgment of the people who do. They are our problem. That doesn't mean that they're independent. Doesn't mean that they're left or right. What it means is that they've decided to back out of the process altogether. So for those of you who think that this is a swing district, I am here to tell you that you are wrong. This is not a swing district. This is a seesaw district. A swing district says that we have a bunch of people in the middle that sometimes vote Democratic and sometimes vote Republican, go back and forth. There is a percentage of people who do that, but it's actually really quite small. A seesaw district is one that swings based on who has the energy. Which side drives up the unengaged, the disengaged, the intermittent, or the occasional voter? That side is the one who wins. When we had Barack Obama on the ballot, what happened? We drove up the intermittent and the non-engager voters on our side, and that's why we won. But last cycle, who had the energy? Who drove out the unengaged, disinterested voter? The right. That's who got them. And that's why Donald Trump won this district. It went Obama to Trump. How did that happen? It wasn't because of people who thought they were so close in the middle, but it was from people on the margins who decided to re-engage because something connected to them. And so what I'm here to tell you is that I am the best shot at engaging the disengager, because the disengager does not engage because of party, and they do not engage because of platform. They engage because of person. I'm going to repeat that. They don't engage the party. They don't engage the platform. They engage the person. Because that's what they're comfortable with. I get a feeling about you. I like you. You're different. You connect to me. And so the ability to connect to that disengaged population that you need to turn out to win is the sine qua non to winning this district. I want to plant that in your mind so that you're thinking about that as we go through this conversation. Because if we continue to do the same thing we've done in the past, run the candidate that appeals to the engaged population, we're going to lose. Because they're always going to be engaged. They're always going to vote for that person. But that's not enough numbers to win this district. It'll always be 48%. And 48% does not win. Is that a fair assessment?
Sounds logical.
Okay. All right. So, enough about my background, enough about my theory. Let's talk about the issues. I love talking about the issues, and any issue we can discuss. There's one that I want to get out front, and then we can talk about any that are on your mind. I am a very strong pro-gun reform advocate. I believe very strongly in policy that prevents gun deaths, not just thoughts and prayers after the fact. I know there's a lot of people who believe in the Second Amendment, and I respect the Second Amendment. Do I think that is applicable today as it was in the past? No, but it's not up to me. I am a servant of the court, and the court has said that we have Second Amendment rights, and I respect that. So I want to share with you my idea for how we fix the gun problem, because we're never going to fix it 100%, and that shouldn't be the goal. The goal is reducing gun deaths, not, we throw up our hands if we can't eliminate them. That's not how it works. So I think that every gun owner should be required to carry liability insurance, just like every driver is required to carry liability insurance. I'll tell you how this works for me. When I go get a car and I want to drive it or whatever, I go to my app, thegeneral.com or USAA, I have USAA.com, and they do a background check on me, right? Before they insure me, they do a check. Now, if I've had 500 accidents, my insurance is going to be real expensive. I may not even be able to be insured. If I've had 5 DUIs, my insurance might be real expensive. In fact, I might not be able to be insured at all. If I had epilepsy or something that would make me unsafe on the road, I might not be insured at all, which would keep me from driving in the first place. But if I am insured, let's say I get a policy, here are some things that policy is going to do. First of all, it's going to modify my behavior. Just like car insurance modifies your behavior. You speed less. Well, you don't want to get caught speeding. You don't drive drunk. You wear your seatbelt. Do you remember when we didn't have seatbelt laws? I do. Do you remember that? And do you remember what happened when they made mandatory seatbelt laws? Everybody, half the population was like, communism! Big brother! How dare you, sir? My freedom! But now, can you imagine driving anywhere without your seatbelt on? No. And you know why? Because you want to keep your premiums low. You get a ticket if you don't wear your seatbelt, you keep your premiums low. So insurance premiums drive safer behavior. They cause you to do things to keep your premiums low that actually just keep you safer. The same could be true for gun policy, right? You want low premium, you lock up your gun. You get your annual safety check. You get a mental health screening. Or you get a fingerprint lock on your gun. That's going to drive safer behavior. And the last thing is, if you do use your gun on yourself or someone else, now there's something behind you financially. Let me ask you, who do you think is paying for the medical bills of the Parkland kids?
Their parents or the taxpayers?
Exactly right. It is either their parents or the taxpayers. But if they got hit by a car, who would be paying for it?
Auto insurance.
The auto insurance, right? So why, the reason that we require people to have auto insurance is because they are automatically a risk to everybody around them, and the insurance process determines just how much of a risk is it. But when you buy a gun, you are automatically a risk to everybody around you. And it should be the same process that ascertains just how much of a risk it is. And at some point, there should be a pole in the sand that says, too much risk. You don't get a gun. That's how we make it safer for everyone. And everybody knows how this would work. Now, there's some people that say the NRA would totally smack you down and you would never get that through. And I would say, first of all, lots of people thought the seatbelts would never happen either, A. And B, if there's one group that I think can put the kibosh on the NRA, it's the insurance lobby. Because that's what would happen. The insurance lobby has as much power, if not a whole lot more, in Washington, D.C. than the NRA does. And if they see this as a cash cow that it really is, they're going to start to get behind that. They're going to like this idea because, quite frankly, most gun owners are quite safe. So paying a low premium every year, let's say $50 a year to have a gun, that's a cash cow for the insurance company. And it is a rare person that's going to use that gun on themselves or another. But in the aggregate in our country, we lose 33,000 Americans a year to gun violence and gun death. 33,000. And the theory is, well, there's just nothing we can do about it. Do you agree with that? I don't. I think that putting insurance into the process will have the consequence of reducing gun deaths. And that's the goal. It will drive safer gun behavior, and for some people it will be a deterrent from buying a gun in the first place. And to me, that's all good. What do you think?
Good point.
Yeah, you like it?
Yeah.
Good point.
To a point. To a point. And that, hey, every not dead person is a win.
Another good idea.
Yeah.
Good point.
Alrighty, so let's talk about what you guys want to talk about. I've gotten all I wanted to say out. What is on your mind? What are the issues that most are sort of top line issues for you?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Okay. What are your thoughts? What's on your mind?
Well, this is probably too far left for most of the people, but I think we have to have Medicare for all, single payer system. You lived in Europe, I lived in Europe, and we see how it works.
Right.
And everybody has to be covered.
You may call it left, I call it down, which means focused on the people, and I am in complete concurrence with you. I do support Medicare for all. I want to explain why, if that's okay. Back in the day, and some of you may be old enough to remember this, maybe not, when the young people were coming back from World War II, there was this huge push of urbanization, industrialization, all these guys going to work, to go into college on the GI Bill. There was this huge growth of the middle class. And there were a lot of employers that were kind of caught behind the 8 ball. And in lieu of increasing wages in commensurate with the increased skills and education of the workforce, they came up with this thing called fringe benefits. Now, back in the day, fringe benefits started out with like a Christmas turkey. But then it became life insurance, and pretty soon it became health insurance. This was something that employers did as an alternative to higher wages, as a way of keeping and recruiting talent, right? And they thought at the time that it would be cheaper than raising wages. What they found out later was that wages were actually more predictable and stable than medical costs, which went out of control. But that's what they were thinking at the time. The reason it's important that you understand this is because the reason people got health insurance in the first place was as an antecedent or as an accident of their employment. I get insurance because I'm employed by you. Now, not every employer offered it, right? But to the extent that the employer offered it, it was based on your employment. You leave your employment, you lose your insurance. And back in the day, that wasn't the sine qua non. That wasn't the end all be all. There were other companies and there were other plans and so on and so forth. But over time, as our medical world became deeper, more sophisticated, more costly, our medications became more costly, our procedures became more costly, our doctors became more costly, hospitals became more costly. As that started to become out of control cost expansion, it became more and more problematic for people to actually leave their health insurance provider. So it started to stifle movement. But more importantly, there were all these gaps, right? If you weren't getting insurance through your employer, your options were Medicaid, if you were really poor, Medicare if you were a senior, CHIP if you were a child, and then this whole swath of people in the middle who had nothing. The employment world kind of filled the gap a little bit with spousal benefits. But there still was this big slice of people who weren't getting access to healthcare through any other means. So there was this private market. But who did we decide to let regulate that private market? Who got to control what that looked like?
The insurance companies.
The insurance companies. They chose what they were going to cover, how they were going to cover, what the premiums were going to be, what they could use as disqualifications. They chose what those plans would look like. They were happy to market plans that really covered basically nothing. You'd pay monthly and you'd have like a $6,000 or $8,000 deductible. Let me ask you something. What do you have when you have to come up off of $8,000 out of your own pocket before your insurance kicks in? Nothing. But that's the way they structured it. So the Affordable Care Act was really an effort to grab up that middle group and to regulate what those plans are going to look like and to help them buy plans if the plans were too expensive for them to afford. Because they believed that a lot of people who aren't insured in that private space was because they couldn't afford it. And they were right. And so Obamacare brought us 22 million more insured Americans. But let's get clear. This was never a thoughtful process, right? It was a patchwork quilt of some people who could afford it having excellent care, some people who were on the government system getting some decent care, and a whole lot of people getting nada. And this was our theory. So what I'm here to tell you is no one with half a brain, if they were starting from scratch, would draft this plan. No one. Because it is the singularly most inefficient way to deliver medical services and medical health care, right? It's the most inefficient way. Think about it. Every employer in the United States that offers health care is a healthcare provider in and of themselves. Each one of them goes out in the market to find plans, has an open enrollment period, has benefits people, has claims people, has to file with the federal regulatory schemes and make sure that their plans meet certain codes. Every one of them has to do that. Now, if somebody asked me, do you think that that's an efficient thing? To have every employer have to do that? No. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Considering how costly and expensive and complicated our healthcare is today. I mean, when it was back in the day and you could exchange a bushel of apples for your appendicitis, okay, cool. But we're not there anymore. We haven't been there in a long time. And healthcare today is fundamental. You don't have life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice without life. And life means devoid of death. And that's what happens when you don't have your kidney dialysis. That's what happens when you don't have your cancer treatment. That's what happens when you don't take your hypertension medication, right? Death or serious injury or suffering. That's not life. So I start from the premise that I'm a conservative at heart. No, I really am, even though I'm totally progressive. I'm a conservative at heart. I want the most fiscally sound approach to healthcare, grounded in my moral values that every American should have healthcare. That's what I believe. And so to me, the only scheme that actually makes sense for every American, that is the most efficient, that requires the least duplication of cost and effort, and that is not controlled by insurance companies that care first and foremost of their own profits, is single payer Medicare for all. That is the answer. Coverage from cradle to grave with no chapter in between in which you have to be terrorized by a broken ankle. That's why it makes sense. And there are a lot of people out there that are going to tell you it's too ambitious. We cannot do it. Where there's no way we can get there. The this, that, and the other thing. And I will tell you that the majority of that conversation comes from insurance lobbyists who tell members of Congress, who tell people in the media, who tell everybody that wants to listen that there's no way that we could do this. The hell are they talking about? We're the people of the United States of America. We can make it exactly what we want, and it's ours. It belongs to us. So if we want to change it, we absolutely can. But the thing is, there's a whole lot of people getting extremely wealthy off of the system the way it currently is. And they have no desire to see that system change. No matter how inefficient or difficult or unfair or immoral it may be. And I'm here to tell you, you can agree or you can disagree, but I'm going to tell you that saying that you're okay with Americans dying from preventable and treatable diseases, injuries, or conditions because they simply can't afford the care, if you're okay with that, then I'm going to tell you I'm not buying your patriotism. Because patriotism is not loving America. Patriotism is loving Americans. And I'm not okay with any Americans dying and suffering. That's not okay for me on any level. Now, I may not be able to stop it or prevent it everywhere, but to the extent that I can stop it and prevent it, I'm going to. Is that fair? Is that fair? Okay. Thank you for the question. I really do appreciate that. Now, I know there's some people who disagree, and I'd be happy to engage with you. I mean, there are people who feel like, you know, our system the way it is, it's working just fine. But I have to wonder, for whom is it working fine?
It's easy for us, we're all on Medicare.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a fair question to ask. Do you like your Medicare?
Well, most of us, I believe, do like the Medicare.
Yes.
How can you not like the Medicare? When someone's sending you a check, you're not gonna turn it down on a monthly basis. Your Medicare.
No?
Well, the battle was well begun with Obama, because they realized once they got those improvements in there,
People will get
the
used to it.
populace would never let them take it away. I spent a lot of time in Canada, and the Canadians will bitch and scream when things go wrong, but they basically like the Medicare with all its laws. And you just look at the other democracies or free countries around the world. Most of them have some sort of plan full of faults, but they come in about 1/3 of the cost here, and they're just as, and the point is, everyone has to contribute. Once everyone contributes, the cost for individual sicknesses are reduced. And just like your automobile insurance. And I think the biggest lesson is to get the Democrats elected, just so that they can continue to fight for that health plan. That one plan itself is worth the whole battle, regardless of your political affiliation.
Well, we lose the middleman of negotiating all the different health contracts. It saves a lot of money for taking care of people.
But that's the problem, because what we have now, we have built-in people that are making money under the current plan with all its, so you have to unwind all those things, as well as bring the improvements in. So it's a big challenge, but the biggest thing is, if you don't get a certain type of person in office that believes in it, the whole thing becomes just a waste of effort.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. That is the challenge. The thing about politics, and I'm going to say this, you know, from my experience, is that there can be a whole lot of people that agree on something. Like, we have 5 candidates for governor. Raise your hand if you've decided who you want to run, don't tell me who it is, but raise your hand if you've decided who you want to vote for governor in the primary.
No, I was gonna ask your advice.
Okay, all right, you have, okay, cool, only 2 people have. Well, for whatever, but the thing is, if you were to ask which one of these believes in protecting the environment, all 5 would say yes. Which one of these believe in women's rights? All 5 would say yes. Which one of them believes in health coverage? All 5 of them would say yes. But where you would get the difference is where they put their political energy and their mojo. You know, as governor, they're gonna have priorities, they're gonna have things that drive them, personal pet peeves and so on. It is in that space that you will find a champion for your thing or not, okay? And that's why it's so important that you ask yourself, what kind of candidate is this? Not, do I like them? Do they look like me? Do they come from my area of the state? Do I have a personal connection? Less important. What's important is, what kind of voter are you? And what kind of candidate actually fits you and what you want to see happen with the party and with the country and the state. So that's why I did a little primer on that today on my pan chat. I did a little primer on, like, figure yourself out as a Democrat or as a voter, as a person. Where are you? Because if you figure yourself out, it's really easy to figure out who the candidates are that best suit you. So that's what I was saying. But I will tell you that there are a lot of candidates who will tell you, yeah, I'm for Medicare for all, but who will never put their personal mojo and their personal heft behind getting it done. And there are other candidates who will emphasize, use their advocacy, use their personal heft to get it done. And that is the difference. So everybody will say at some point that they could see that happening some way, somehow, but very few people are standing up and saying with passion, I'm committed to trying to make this happen for all Americans. So that's one of the things that I think you should be cautious of when you're choosing your candidates. But I think this is a really important analytical thing. I mean, the analytical thing is, are we making decisions based on short-term profit or long-term sustainability? I think that's a fair question. I mean, when you look at the problem in the river right now, right? Everybody's groaning, right? This has been a problem for a long time. But it's not actually a complicated problem. My opponent will tell you all about the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the this and the what and the sewage and the Orlando and the surface runoff and all of that, but that is not actually the essence of the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. The essence of the problem is short-term decision-making based on the profitability of the developer in the near term that does not factor in the cost to the environment in the long term. That is the disease. To put it broadly, it's greed. Greed. The land south of the lake was the land that the water naturally traveled over to end up in the Everglades where Mother Nature intended it to go. That land belongs to the people of the state of Florida. It does not actually belong to Big Sugar. Big Sugar leases it from us. The question is, who wrote those leases? Was it lease fairies?
Big Sugar.
No. It was legislators. State legislators wrote that deal, and the governor co-signed on that. Who was responsible for that? Republicans. And that's who did that. When those leases were coming up due, they got renegotiated not for an additional 5-year term, but for a 30-year term. Who did that? Sugar plum fairies? Republicans did that. Okay? And since we have now, the people of the state of Florida paid, I don't know how many, like a couple million dollars to get this referendum on the ballot to buy the land south of the lake. Now, I'm going to ask you a simple question. How are we buying land that we actually own already? But the theory is that we were going to compensate Big Sugar for taking the land, right? That's the theory. So we taxed ourselves to buy that land. The money was taken and put into coffers, and then did the land get bought? Okay, whose fault was that? Whose decision was that? To not actually buy that land. To slow it down to a crawl to the point where nothing happens. I can study something into oblivion too. But that's what happened. So whose fault is that? If we moved water south into the Everglades and did it over the STAs that actually cleans the water of the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and everything else that's in it, then we actually have a chance of no longer releasing water into our rivers. But I want to make something clear so you do not get confused, and this is so important. It does not matter if the water in the lake was crystal clear. It is fresh water, and we are releasing it into salt rivers. We repeat, Lake Okeechobee is a fresh water lake. The St. Lucie River, the Caloosahatchee rivers are brackish rivers. They have a delicate salinity balance for the ecosystem that so if you released billions of tons of ice, crystal clear water, you would still destroy the ecology of the Indian River Lagoon. You would still destroy it. The problem is the water going into the river. It just so happens that right now, that water is way yuckier than it usually is. It's always yucky. It's just pinnacle yucky right now. But it's always yucky. But even if it wasn't yucky, sending it into our rivers is disastrous. The answer has always been about getting water south into the Everglades. It has always been about that. And because that is the issue from an environmental standard, we are running against the juggernaut, because everything about water management in South Florida is about protecting agricultural land. That's what it's about. Levees and dikes and canals and locks and all of that stuff. Everything that we've built on water infrastructure is about protecting, nourishing, and watering agricultural land. Everything about it. So, What makes perfect sense from a perspective of the water needed to irrigate sugar fields makes absolutely no sense from the perspective of the water needed to feed the Everglades and stay out of our rivers. And that, my friends, is the loggerhead that we face. There is Team A that says, do what's right for our environment, and Team B that says, do what's right for our agriculture. You gotta figure out which side you're on. Because right now, it is loggerhead. And everybody's looking at everybody else going, Jesus, this is so complicated. You know, it's just, we're trying. We're trying so hard, because every time there's an algae bloom, everybody gets up in arms, everybody's pissed off, everybody's angry and raging, and the people who don't want to change, the people in Team Agriculture, just look at their hands and just say, it's not us, it's not our fault, we're doing everything we can. I mean, look how hard we're trying, and look how hard we're advocating, and the CERP, and the dike, but that's all kabuki theater, people. That's all show. They are responsible for this situation because they're the ones who don't want it to change. I can't say it any more plainly than that. And people say, oh, Pam, you're being so partisan. You're being so partisan. Look, I'm being honest. If it was the Democrats doing it, I'd call them out too. And you know what? There are some Democrats that are on that side. I hate to say it, but there are some Democrats that are pretty much owned by Big Sugar too. I don't call out names, and but I'm telling the truth. So the reason our environmental disaster is happening is because of the people who are making choices about how to manage it. That's why. And if you ask me, well, how are we going to get the money to build those STAs and to fund that CERP and all of that stuff, how are we going to do it? I'm going to tell you this. When I was in California, I was aware of the delicacy of the Alaska Wildlife Reserve. Raise your hand if you're aware of that. Are you aware of the Alaska Wildlife Reserve and how dangerous it is to drill in that area?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. When I was a teenager, I learned about the massive deforestation of the Amazon and how dangerous that is. Raise your hand if you've heard about the deforestation of the Amazon. Mm-hmm. Okay. I will tell you that in Jacksonville, they have no idea about our river right here. We don't do a good job as Floridians to make our ecological disaster an international and national issue. We don't. We spend millions of dollars telling people to come to Florida and enjoy our beaches. And we don't think that we should invest in informing people of the ecological disaster that is happening, because the thing is, and this is what I've learned about politics, is that the congressman from Colorado and the congressman from New Mexico and the congressman from Michigan, they have their own priorities, and our river is not their priority. But we can make it their priority. Because if we make it their constituents' priority, we make it their priority. And the people in Flint have done a very good job of making sure that the rest of us are still aware of the problem in Flint. So when the appropriations process happens and the congressman from Michigan says, hey, I need to deal with this Flint water, the delegation from Florida and the one from California are going to go, yeah, we need to do that because our voters are telling us we need to do that. That's the same process that has to happen for us. We need to get the environmentally sound congressmen from all over the country to come here to learn about our problem, and then we got to bombard their voters and their donors with information about why they should push their representatives to vote for our project. I call it create an environmental bloc in Congress. Hey, California, you got 56 congressmen. We got like 28. We create a bloc. That's a lot of votes, right? But I haven't seen that happen. Have you? It's a simple question. Brian Masters is supposed to be all of that on the river. Have you seen him make that block of Republicans? I mean, he can bring down Louis Gohmert, right? He can convince Kevin McCarthy and Scott Womack, right? Or maybe not. Maybe he can't, because his team doesn't believe in environmental stewardship at all. Maybe he's a bit player on a team rowing in the wrong direction. That may be it too. But what I'm telling you is that what we've been doing is not working. And I think everybody would agree with that. Of course, maybe I'm wrong. Do you agree with it?
It's definitely not working.
Yeah.
It's not working. So my plan is very simple. Step number one, when I get sworn in as your congresswoman in January, I am going to invite key Democrats here, but not just them. I'm going to invite their spouses, and most importantly, their children. This is a key component of my plan. You gotta get their kids down here. They're gonna come, and do you know why they're gonna come? Because it's January. Of course they're coming. It's Florida. So we're gonna bring them, and we're gonna bring their wives, their spouses, their kids, and we're going to take them by the hand and walk them through our problem. We're gonna walk them across our lake, around our rivers, up down in our swamp, in the Everglades. We're gonna show them everything. Then we're gonna send them home. But before we send them home, we're gonna have a sophisticated, well thought out social media and regular media onslaught in their districts to their voters. This is important. Their voters will hear about their congressman visiting Florida to see the ecological disaster and destruction of the Everglades. And then, come March, when we have our first major budget battle, the entire Florida congregation or delegation is going to say, hey, we got to fund the CERP. Here's the deal. You fund our CERP, and we'll vote to fund your thing. Quid pro quo. But now you know what you're working for, and you know that your voters support it. And that's how you actually get the money appropriated. I can't guarantee that will happen, but I can guarantee that it's a better idea than what we've been doing. Right? Fair enough? Okay. That's my plan. What do you think? Yes? No? Maybe?
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. It's a different approach, I know, but I think it can actually work. I'm a big believer in social media. I have like 27,000 people that check in on what I have to say on social media. That's not huge, but it's something. And I know that that has influence and it continues to grow. And we can do that. We can influence people to better understand our problem so that they're willing to fund the solution. Because that's where the rub is right now. I mean, I've been all over the state, and I will tell you, Pensacola has no idea what's happening with the San Lucie River. None. They have their own environmental issues with their oyster bays and the water from Georgia and so on and so forth. But we don't know a whole lot about that either. We tend to be real localized here in Florida. Way more localized than some other states are. It's something we need to probably get better at as environmental stewards. Fair enough. Any other issues you want to cover? We covered healthcare, we covered the environment, and we covered guns, which are the top 3 things that I talk about on the campaign trail. Public education is the other one that I talk about a great deal. I'm very, very concerned about making sure we do not move to a privatized model of public education. It is simply, in my opinion, I'm just saying it like I believe it, it is a move to resegregate public education, not just along race lines, but along class lines. It's a way of driving public dollars into private hands, which I'm no big fan of. And it's a way of breaking up teacher unions, which I'm also no fan of. So, I'm against it. And I'm not sure that there's any proof that charter schools actually produce better education on our children. Certainly not on a macroscopic scale. There may be some charter schools that are really worth funding. Maybe they specialize in autism spectrum children or other kinds of special needs or kids that need a very peculiar schedule because of a medical situation or they're athletes or something. Okay, I get that. But for the most part, the covenant and the promise that we've made to and between each other to ensure that all American kids make the most of their gifts and talents is not a promise that we should jettison. And I believe that public education is the thread that connects us. It creates a cultural equalizer in a way. In a country as diverse as ours, it is not a good thing for you to get all of your education and all of your exposure amongst only people who think like you. That is not a good thing. I am not a huge fan of homeschooling, I'll be honest with you. I don't know how smart your mom or your dad is. I'm not entirely sure that those parents are qualified to educate their kids. But even if they are, even if they're technically smart enough, if the reason you want to homeschool your kid is so that they don't get exposed to people who have different religion or different, background or different race, I don't like that. Now, granted, it's a constitution, you can do what you want, but we shouldn't encourage it. And I think we should encourage public education everywhere and in every way that we possibly can. And that, to me, includes making it more accessible, university education more accessible, and technical and vocational training as well. But my plan is this: any young person who wants to go to college and who's willing to dedicate the first 4 to 6 years of their career in service of the country in an area of special need, in education, healthcare, technology, environmental stewardship. There are areas of special need in our country. If you're willing to dedicate the first 4 to 6 years of your career to be placed where the country needs you, then we will pay for your education. Does that sound reasonable?
It's better than taking out a loan.
Because I know what it's like to have loans. I know what it's like. It sucks. And what we've done is we've said we want you in debt first before you get your education. We want you on the hook, and you will be on the hook for the rest of your life. For many of these people have debt from the time that they start college to their 60s. In the midst of all of this, you're servicing collegiate debt, you're buying a house, so you've got a mortgage, you've got credit card debt, you're paying for your parents sometimes, right? You're borrowing to put your kids through school, and at some juncture in all of that, you're supposed to save for your own retirement. And we're supposed to make our salaries stretch to that extent. That doesn't make sense. I think our kids have it a lot harder than we did. I got to the University of California on $800 a quarter. It's now $13,000 or $14,000 a quarter. That's ludicrous. That's not a middle class thing. Who got $13,000 hanging around? So people are borrowing to put their kids through school while they're paying off what they borrowed to get through them schools themselves. How's that cool? That's not right. And this structure, the system is being designed to squeeze the regular guy, the regular gal from literally every angle. And I just don't think that we need to do it that way. We do not have a resource problem in this country. We have a resource allocation problem in this country. And people who are making allocation decisions are doing so from a very skewed set of values. And that's what's going on. Is that fair? No, at least that's my opinion. Yeah. I've covered the waterfront of my issues. Is there issues that you'd like me to cover? Anything that you'd like to talk about?
How about women's rights?
Okay. I believe in them. I know the choice. I am pro-choice. I am completely pro-choice. But I think the bigger issue facing women right now is how much we've historically been devalued in the marketplace.
How much what?
We've been devalued in the marketplace. Why do you think it is that teachers are constantly underpaid?
Look at the gender.
Because it was women's work. In the very beginning, we treated teaching as something that young women did before they got married. And then we treated something as matrons did, but we've always treated it as some women did. And for that reason, we've never taken any kind of economic or actuarial analysis of what teaching adds to the economy. We've never done it. We've never done it. And so, in my opinion, we pay teachers way under what they actually contribute to the economy. And that needs to be corrected. So you want to ask about women's rights, that's one thing that I would correct. Another thing that I would tell you is that many, many women don't know that they're being underpaid. To give you a personal example, I worked at a big old law firm called Morgan, Lewis & Bockius. I had no idea how much I was getting paid vis-a-vis everybody else. I was just happy because I was getting paid. It was, it was the first major significant paycheck I got a bonus. I never got a bonus before in my life. This was cool. It wasn't until years later that I learned that the guy sitting right next to me got a much bigger bonus, even though I had more billable hours and I had more successful outcome. It wasn't until years later that he told me what his bonus was. And I was like, what? The thing is, I did not know. And most women don't know that they're being underpaid vis-a-vis their colleagues, because there's not a mechanism to find out that doesn't put you at risk. Because if you go up to your boss and say, hey, how much is he getting paid vis-a-vis me? You're going to incur the wrath of your employer. Be it covertly or overtly, you're going to be way discouraged from doing that, and you may just straight up be fired for doing that. So what I am proposing is that we have an alternative mechanism, which is that I can inquire to the EEOC or to something in the Department of Justice, and they will inquire anonymously on my behalf about the pay of this group or band of employees. And they will send me back a letter that says, yes, you're within the normal range, you're low, or you're high. That's all I need to know to make a decision. Do I want to investigate more? Do I want to take a risk and find out more? But until I have some kernel of information, how do I know that I'm being underpaid? Women don't go and fight for their wages like men do. We undersell ourselves on resumes. I saw some study about how women write resumes and how men write resumes. I'm sure you'll be shocked to find that we underrepresent our talent and men overrepresent theirs. When we negotiate for initial salaries, we ask for less on the general. These are things that are all components of women earning less than men. And yet it has a bigger effect on both children and seniors when women are underpaid, because women typically have a bigger percentage of their paycheck that goes into child care or elder care than men do. Isn't that wild? Isn't that interesting? If your wife made more, you'd have more space yourself. This is not just a women's issue. When women earn more, men do better. When women earn more, children do better. And when women earn more, elders do better. Seems to me like that's a really good reason to have women earn more. And it's not about competing with men based on their value. That's the way it's been framed by the GOP. The way they frame it is, why should we have to pay you more? You know, women don't even want that, somebody said. I think it was Martha McSally. I was like, girl, what are you drinking? But the way the GOP frames it is that if women get paid more, you're pulling away from men to do so. Isn't that the way that it comes across?
Absolutely.
Is that, because that's the way it feels to me. It feels to me like when they talk about increasing women's wages, it's always you gotta pull away from the men to pay the women more. And I'm suggesting that that's not true at all. If you pay everybody the right way, you're not taking from anybody. Everybody's being treated equitably. It's not necessarily equally, but equitably. And we want that because the men do better too. Because now their spouses, their girlfriends, their wives, their mothers have more. Less pressure on you, man. It's a good thing, right? And that's what I talk about women being valued. Not just women's right over themselves and their own person, their own family, but also in the workplace to be treated equitably. Fair enough?
And I also think, what about what we want to happen to our own bodies?
Oh, yeah.
And that doesn't mean just according to abortion or anything like that. But if we give the government an opportunity to tell us what we can do and what we can't do with our bodies, that's one thing. But are they gonna start telling us what vitamins we can take, what shots we're gonna need?
Exactly.
You know, what we don't need, what we have to put into our children, what we don't wanna put into our children?
Right.
I mean,
I completely agree with you.
it just goes on and on and on, and the government is getting too much say about our personal human being.
Right. I'm going to tell you, first of all, I totally agree with you. I'm going to tell you that one of the things that first came to me when I talked about being pro-choice was that there's really no chapter of my life where I feel like I should defer to the judgment of the government about myself. Like if I want a tattoo, I'm going to get one. There's no chapter of my life where the government gets to tell me, oh no, you don't get to have that, right? I'm not inviting the government to substitute my judgment for me, period, ever. And I wouldn't expect any man to do it. I mean, could you imagine if the government got to decide when you got to buy Viagra? That would be wrong. You're a citizen in full. You have freedom over yourself, your body, your whole, that is dominion over yourself. Just because you get pregnant doesn't mean you lose dominion over yourself. That's a problem. But I will say this also about abortion fight, and I'm just gonna call it the way I see it. There is a portion of the anti-abortion movement that is deeply, deeply morally connected to this whole concept of the soul and where that comes from and where that lands and so forth, and I'm going to give them credit for being genuinely concerned about that. But the only people that I give genuine credit for is the ones who are also anti-death penalty and anti every other kind of death and anti-suicide and the whole nine. If you're consistent and you're compassionate, then I'm going to be like, okay, cool, I get you. I don't agree with you, but I get you. But what I have found is that a lot of this abortion discussion, it's not really the abortion itself that bothers people. It's who's choosing it that bothers people. Because when it's a powerful man who's choosing an abortion for his daughter, his wife, his girlfriend, his porn star, whatever it might be, they're perfectly okay with it. That hypocrisy needs to be called out. It really needs to be called out. So abortion, life or death issue, as they frame it, to have a woman have exclusive dominion over something that man has no power over is what irks them. But the thing is, most women do not choose abortion in a vacuum. They do have boyfriends and husbands and lovers and men in their lives. And quite often, in fact, most often, those boyfriends and husbands and lovers want the abortion too. Do you know how many men are happy walking around this country glad they don't have 18 years of child support for a kid that they didn't want? They're overjoyed, and they are sitting there quietly happy in their soul while they let their girlfriend or their wife or their daughter be thrown up on the moral cross. And they're not saying anything. And that bothers me. I would like to see a few men stand up and say, you know, when I was 18, my girlfriend got pregnant, we chose an abortion, and I am grateful that we did, and I stand with her, and I benefit from that, and I know that that was the right decision for us, and I dare you, I defy you to judge her, because if you got to judge her, then you judge me. I've not seen a dude do that, have you?
No, you know, the other thing that's coming to me so powerfully is the sexual harassment that is going on with the legislators, you know, nationally and well, nationally for sure. And how does that fit with all this?
It's about control.
Exactly.
Sexual harassment is about control. It is
Clearly.
about the dynamic. I have personal experiences. Now, I will be honest, and it should not shock you, that it's I've not had a whole lot of people try to sexually harass me because I have a very forceful personality. And most people kind of sense from afar that I am not the one. Right? But I have on a few occasions. And I'm not saying that women with forceful personalities don't get harassed. I'm just saying that that hasn't happened to me. But what I can tell you is that on a few occasions, I have been in a power dynamic situation, be it a collective bargaining situation, an arbitration situation, a boardroom, someplace where, and somebody has made a comment or framed a comment in a flirtatious sexual overtone kind of way for the express purpose of minimizing my personal power. They wanted to diminish me. So they put a sexual overtone to indicate to the other men in the room that I should be viewed in a sexualized light. They learned to regret that. But it has happened on a few occasions to me. And I understood in that context that it wasn't about sex at all. They didn't really want me.
It's power.
It was about power dynamic. And them dominating me and dominating the situation and me backing down. They soon learned that I just don't have back down in me. I just got up in their face and was like, what? And then they were like, oh.
Oh, you stood on your 2 feet, period.
I stood firm.
Congratulations.
And I made clear to them that I wasn't gonna tolerate that, and I wasn't gonna go back down, and I wasn't gonna let them run off in that direction. But it took a minute for me to figure out how to do that, right? It's not the easiest thing for a young woman to learn to do. And the first time it happened to me was very disquieting. I remember being like shaky and really scared and not sure what to do, and feeling so disrespected and marginalized, but not feeling free to say so, and not having anybody to say it to. Like, it's a really weird thing to be one woman in a room with 8 guys, and somebody says, you know, hot cakes or something to you, and you're just like, what do I do? You don't want to make a big deal out of it. You don't want to pour more attention on it. You don't want to be the, you know, back when I was coming up and when I was in the business world, making a complaint like that just made you an outsider. It just quickly put you on the hot track to troublemaker, you know? So I had to figure out how to deal with it without losing myself. And that's kind of how I did. I just was like, okay, if you go there, I'll go there, hyper aggressive, and then I'll make you uncomfortable too. So let's both be uncomfortable.
I'll never forget, I was so proud of myself. I had the support for this position that I wanted, working in, you know, one of the major places in Boston. And so I had the appointment with the head honcho, and he was very nice, and I was walking out, and he pushed me in back of the door. I was like 19. And he pushed me in back of the door and he said, look, I just want you to know, you do what I want and you can have anything here. And I said, you know, there's not anything I want that much in the world. And I just walked out the door. So when you say, you know, actually coming against somebody, it's important. No
It's
matter-
sometimes easier said than done, I will admit. The first couple times it happened to me, I was just, but then, you know, and maybe I was willing to go for broke. I knew it was risky, but I was like, you know, I was a naval officer, so there's a part of me that was like, okay, let's go. And in the Navy, that never happened to me, because I was an officer, and the dynamic there is very different, and people know to respect the rank, even if they don't necessarily know how to deal with it. I had a few people that kind of like, oh, dude, that's a sexy lieutenant. I'll be like, you know, I had my experiences in the Navy, but I never suffered for that kind of disrespect in the Navy. So that was, you know, a good experience for me. But anyway, I don't want to burn your ears with talk. I mean, I talk so much, but I hope you got something out of this.
Oh, yeah.
I hope you learned how I think, how I reason through things, why I think the way that I do. I am very much an aggressive truth teller. I'll call out anything. And I'm a system disruptor. I know that makes people uncomfortable. But you need that. The biggest issue right now is, you know, who's gonna represent us in Washington, but nobody represents us in Washington till we get somebody through that general election. And we have to understand what we're up against in a Brian Mast. Brian Mast is gonna have unlimited amount of money available to him, so the money is not gonna be the issue. The Democratic Party will invest in whoever wins this nomination because it cannot afford not to. This is a sine qua non area for Bill Nelson and for our gubernatorial candidate. There is no math to winning either one of those seats without Palm Beach County, so need not worry, the party will invest in Palm Beach County. It will invest in Florida 18, it absolutely will. So that's not the issue. The issue is, will we go toe-to-toe money-wise with Brian Mast? Absolutely not. He will always have more. But can we go toe-to-toe with him in other ways? Well, he's a military guy. I'm a military gal. He lost his legs in Afghanistan. I did not lose my legs. You can tell I still have my legs. But I also served overseas for 2 years. I deployed away from my family to an area of great danger. And I outrank him. So one thing that Brian Mast cannot do to me that he has done to others is walk away with the mantle of patriotism. As I told you before, I am the daughter of a military officer. I am the daughter of a Foreign Service officer who was a United States ambassador. I was bred in the bone with American values and patriotism, and no one will out-patriot me, especially not someone who cozies up to Russians like Brian Mast. So I'm looking forward to that fight. Second thing I will say is we have no map to this seat without extraordinary turnout in the African American community and the engagement of non-engager voters who fall in love with a person, not a party or a platform. And I am in the best position to engage those people because I actually try. And I am the one that is in the best position to turn out the vote that we actually need to win. That's what it's about. And so that's why I'm asking for your vote. I think I'd be a great congresswoman. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, but I'm still gonna ask for your vote. I'm gonna ask you to vote for Pam, and August 28th is our election date. Many of you already have your ballots at home, waiting for you. And if you have not filled them out yet, at the very top you will see Congress, Florida 18, and you should put Pam Key right there, because that is the right choice for our district.